Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So I thought that you were supposed to send out a schedule, and I never received a schedule to review our test.
To go over exam 2?
Yeah.
Yep. I'm sending that out this afternoon.
Okay.
Just trying to figure out the rest of my teaching and meetings this or the rest of the week. So I'll be sending
Okay.
that out hopefully later this afternoon.
Okay.
Yep. How's everybody doing?
Still alive.
Good. That's good. We're in week 7.
Yeah.
And if everybody could start putting their names and their campuses in the chat, I would appreciate it. Everybody having a good week so far?
Yeah, it's been pretty good.
I know you guys are incredibly busy.
What about you? Do you have a good week?
Yeah, it's busy. Very busy. Thank you, though. Thanks for asking. Wednesday's a busy day. I teach a couple of classes, have an exam coming up, and the at-risk meetings that we participate in. So it's busy, but it's good. It's all good. So yeah, I have my schedule almost complete for available times and days to review exam 2 if you would like to. What you guys think about exam 2? Any feedback? No feedback?
I think it was pretty good. The topics that y'all talked about were pretty on point with it.
Okay. And did the study guide help?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Didn't see that a lot of you got to any. Did anybody get to a live review?
Yes, I did.
Who's that? Who said that?
Rebecca.
Yes. I know you did. Yes.
Professor, I have a question pertaining to one of our assignments for this week.
Yeah. 1 second, Jennifer. Hang on. Anybody else get to a live session?
Me?
Jennifer, yes. I saw
Yes,
your
ma'am.
name on. Jennifer, yep. Mayona.
If I'm not mistaken, it was 2. Price and Kershaw.
You got to 2, Jennifer. Okay. All right. Anybody else get to a live review besides Rebecca, Jennifer, and Mayona? Did you watch reviews? Did you watch recordings? Okay.
Yes, like 10 times.
Okay. Okay. Okay, Jennifer, go ahead. Your question about an assignment.
The review on your classmates that you're doing the projects with. Do you want it via email or via the assignment thing on Canvas?
Yeah, it says you need to submit it into the discussion post.
No, it's this one.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, give me a second. Let me
Is this
open
the
it.
peer review?
Yeah, the one that you have us give us like a format and we do it on each of the members that we did our group with.
Mm-hmm.
You want that
You can submit that either in the actually, why don't you just email that to me? You guys can email that to me.
No problem, I will do that.
Okay. I've already gotten a few and they've been via email. So go ahead and email that to me.
No problem, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Anybody else have any questions about the project? Now, the initial post, the initial project is due tonight, but you have there's 2 things to do by Sunday. You have to do your peer review, right? And I'm okay if you submit 1 peer review for your whole group. You don't have to do 3 or 4 separate sheets. Okay? So 1 peer review on your whole group, and then don't forget to do peer responses, right? Like you would do any other discussion question. Okay, so there's 2 peers. Peer review, that's how your group did. And I'd like you to think about the peer review in terms of your of both assignments, both group projects, the one in week 3, and the case study, and then this particular project too. Okay, so I'd like for you to think about how you performed in both. Okay, sometimes the first group project starts out, you know, there can be some issues or communication issues, participation issues. Hopefully, the goal of keeping you in the same group for a second project is that group dynamics processes improve, okay, for the second one. And I have heard from some groups that were having issues and trying to stay on top of that and respond to the groups. Okay, but if you were part of a group and didn't participate, you're not going to get participation points. Okay, everybody needs to participate. Okay.
Instructor Marvel.
Yes. Hi, Darren.
Hi.
DJ?
Maybe you all touched on it. I'm just logging in. There is one other person on the Zoom that's in my group Delta. We started our project. However, I've reached out to our group members and there was no response. So I reached out to them individually, and 2 of the group members have dropped the class. So me and my other group member haven't posted anything yet, but we're working on it.
Okay.
Yeah, we're kind of doing the work of the entire group right now.
Okay. Who are the 2 members that dropped?
I can I'll write you.
Why don't you send me an email?
Yeah, I'll email you.
Or stay on after and we can talk about that.
I can stay on after if that works for you guys too.
Okay, yeah. Olivia, are you and Darren in the same group?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. You 2 stay on after.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So welcome to week 7. now that we've completed week 6 and have the exam grades in there, there's several students that did really, really well on the exam, enough to pull them out of that kind of at-risk category. So I'll be completing the mid-module assessments, which is supposed to be done after week 6. So I was just waiting for those grades to be finalized. But for the most part, you guys as a group did. Mary, I don't have Faith trying to log in. I don't have her in the waiting room. So also had some issues. What were the issues trying to get in?
Yeah, it just took a really long time to log into Zoom today. It took me about 5 minutes before it even popped up. And then I see my camera's glitching. I'm all
Yeah,
green.
yeah.
So I'm not sure what's going on with Zoom.
Hang on, Zoom is not letting me in. I've been trying for 5 minutes. It keeps saying the code is invalid.
Yeah,
I would
had to go
tell
in-
I would tell Faith to keep trying. I mean, everybody else is in. I'm not sure what's going on with her. I don't know. I mean, maybe ask her to restart her computer. Okay, Mary, send her a message back. Tell her to restart. Where was I? Oh, so overall, this class did very well on exam 2. There were a couple of lower scores, but overall, you guys did well. I was very proud of you. I will be sending out a schedule this afternoon with some dates and times to meet with me. If you would like to review exam 2, I encourage everybody to review exam 2, regardless of what your scores were. It's always nice to go through what questions that you missed. I can tell you I haven't met with anybody for exam 2. For exam 1, most of the questions that were missed by all students were just simple words and phrases and cues in the questions that were missed. Okay. And we talked about test taking strategies in the meetings that I had with students. So I don't know what we're going to find in exam 2, but hopefully I did meet with quite a bit of people. You are more mindful of these questions and being able to really read the questions and pull out the important parts. And hopefully that's why a lot of you did a lot better on this exam. So I truly believe a couple of things that go into review sessions live is definitely in your favor. It shows in your grades. And then reviewing a previous exam with me, once we get through the questions you missed, then we start talking about test taking strategies. And I know that students benefit from that. Once we figure out what was going on and what you missed, and the great majority of the time, it's not content that's the issue or understanding concepts. It's the way you're attacking the exam and the way you're reading the questions and not being able to pick up negative questions. So anyway, but I was really, really pleased with exam 2 results. So great job. I'll send out that schedule, and whoever wants to sign up, I really encourage anybody who got below an 80. I know 78 is passing, but anybody who got below an 80 to schedule some time with me. If you got above an 80 and you still want to go through your exam, that's great. That's great. Encourage it. Okay. Any questions? So let's see, this is week 7. So we talked about your group project. So today we're going to cover the 2 chapters from last week, chapters 13 and 14, and we'll cover the 4 chapters for this week. And we'll just go through a review of the concepts and the content. I'm going to use the book today because I've highlighted areas in the book for each chapter that I feel are important for you to understand the concept of the chapter. Okay, so we're going to do that. And then we'll do a couple of case studies, and those case studies are actually in a couple of chapters in the book. So we'll do a couple of case studies as we go. Okay. So I think Faith just got in here. Faith, did you got in? Okay. There you are. Okay. Does anybody have any questions before we get going? Are you guys working on your vulnerable populations assignment? That's due in a couple of weeks. I've actually already had some people turn it in. So make sure you're working on that, because that will end up being a big project if you wait too long to do that. Okay, so exam 3 will cover week 6, 7, and 8. So today we'll cover 6 and 7, and then next week we'll cover 8. And that's pretty much it with the content. In week 9, next week we have a lot. There's like 8 chapters. But week 9 is your exam 3. And then week 10, we spend this class time doing a HESI review. Okay, so after next week, the content is done. And then I'll explain it later on, but during week 10, you can go to anybody's review. Every section in community that week is doing HESI reviews. Okay, so you have lots of opportunity to go to HESI reviews. You've got your HESI study guide. Hopefully you're peeking at that and looking to see what topics and concepts are covered on the HESI. So don't bury that document, because if you pull it out at the end, it's going to become an overwhelming document. It's about 60 pages, your HESI review. But remember, that's the whole term. That's 8 weeks worth of content. That's why it's so long. Okay, so if you pull the HESI study guide out the week of we're reviewing HESI, it's probably going to be a bit overwhelming. Okay. And then what was the other thing I was going to tell you guys? Exam 3 study guide should be coming out this week. Okay. So you'll have that. Alrighty. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, let's cover the features from last week. Community assessment and evaluation. Oops. Can you guys see my screen? Can you guys see my screen?
When you first asked, I could see your screen, but it went away.
Okay, can you see it now?
No.
Not yet.
Oh, okay, hang on. Let me see what I'm doing here. Oops, it's not letting me share. Well, at least, okay, then I'm just going to let's see, the recording's still going. Okay. I'm on page 237, if you want to follow along, because you guys have your online book, correct? So let's talk about community assessment and evaluation. Okay, what is the importance of community assessment? Let's say you're the public health nurse or you're the community health nurse. What is the importance of community assessment? I'm not sure how much you prepared for week 6. I know you were taking an exam, but we're covering chapters 13 and 14. So what is the importance of a community assessment?
Knowing your community and what's going on.
Okay. Okay, let's do that scenario I talk about at the beginning of the term. You're moving to a different state. You've been hired as the new community health nurse or the public health nurse. And you're asked by the community leaders to do a community assessment. How are you going to do that? And what kinds of things are you going to be looking for?
You want to look for how easily they have access to healthcare. Maybe you want to see that maybe there's not just like an outpatient facility in the area.
Mhm.
You want to see like their access to education. Maybe the closest college or community college might be miles away. You want to see like what resources they possibly have, like Planned Parenthood or even like other type of health facilities, holistic health.
Okay. That's great. One of the ways we do think, has anybody heard of the term windshield survey? That's all in your readings. What's a windshield survey?
Where you go out in your community, you take a survey of your community
Right.
and you take
Through your windshield. Whether you're driving in your car, whether you're walking the dog, whether you're in a public bus, public transportation. It's called a windshield survey. That's how we start our assessment, by doing a windshield survey. And one of the most important things that you do first as you're doing your windshield survey is you need to figure out what the boundaries of your community are, right? Because you don't want to be driving into the next town. You want to have the boundaries set up for your community assessment. Okay. What do we think the definition of a community is? What do you guys think the definition of a community? What's a community? Okay, in your book, the community is a group of people in a defined population who share something in common, such as a geographic location, interests, or values. That's the formal definition of a community. When we are in community nursing, we have different sets of clients. We can be doing looking at the community as a client. Okay, that is your community-oriented nursing. All right, that's population-focused healthcare. Okay. So the WHO, the World Health Organization, describes 4 goals for healthy communities. Okay, and I'm on page 238. Supporting individual health, promoting quality of life, distributing the resources needed for basic sanitation and hygiene, and then creating accessible healthcare services. Okay, on page 238, Healthy People 2030 has an excellent summary of what their vision and goals are. Okay, Healthy People 2030, I know I've talked about them, but in this particular chapter, it has a definition of what they're all about. Okay, guidelines available for nurses working to improve community health. Okay, and it gives you 5 foundations, that the 5 foundations it's built on. So I want you to take a look at that. Okay. One of the things we obviously use the nursing process in our community assessment. So let's think about, how do we apply our ADPI in doing a community assessment? So let's take the assessment for an example. Well, how would you differentiate doing an assessment of a patient in the hospital versus an assessment in the community? What kinds of things do you look for in the community in your assessment? Devin already shared a lot of that. What are some other things you look for in the community? Maybe what kind of population, right? Is it a population that has a high level of poverty? Does the community have a high level of crime? Does the community have gang activity? Are people living in close quarters? As we're doing our community assessment, we need to talk about partnerships. Why are partnerships important in the community? Again, this is all part of your reading and preparation. Why are partnerships important? And who would you partner with in your community? Let's say you're that new nurse going into a new environment. How are you going to find, other than a windshield survey, how are you going to find out about your community? Who are you going to ask for help?
The health department.
Health department? What about school leaders? What about religious leaders, law enforcement, mental health providers? All these groups of people are going to be part of or you're going to be partnering within the community. There's two kinds of participation from partners in the community. One is passive participation and one is active participation. Okay, with passive, let's say everybody's coming together to talk about building a new rec center. Okay, all the partners are actively involved with assessing, planning, implementing needed change for the community. That's passive. Okay, where active represents a healthy change. Okay, an immediate healthy change. So for an example of active partnership would be a organization that provides before and after school meals for kids. Okay, that's actively in the schools to make a healthy change. Where an example of passive participation, I already gave it, would be a group of community leaders coming together and planning for a new rec center. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so you need to understand the differences between passive and active partnerships. What is the nurse's role in the community? Okay, here's what we talk about trust. So just hear me out. The nurse's ability to establish credibility and trust in the community is priority for doing a community assessment, right? The nurse may be considered an insider. She grew up in the community. She knows people there. She comes from a similar cultural, ethnic background. Okay, this may increase members to speak out, speak openly. Okay, but nurses who are newer to the community, like you guys going into this new environment, you're the new community nurse, and you don't have inside connections and you don't know the community well. What kinds of things can you do to develop trust and to develop community members engaging with you? I'll give myself an example. When I was a school nurse, I was in the same area that all my kids went to school. So I knew all the administration and all the buildings I was in because of my ties to the community. So it was a familiar community to me. There was already trust built. There was already credibility built. So it was pretty easy to go in and communicate and partner with all the schools that I had because, like I said, my kids had all gone there. So I was a parent and I was the nurse. What kinds of things can you do if you're not familiar with the community to establish their trust and establish their motivation to speak with you and talk about issues they're concerned about in the community? What kinds of things could you do?
Just you can make yourself known by participating in community events.
Perfect.
Different things that they have, activities.
Yep. Yep.
Reaching out to families.
Reach out what?
Reaching out to families.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Maybe motivating yourself to learn different cultures in the community. Okay. So community assessment is done for a variety of reasons. Okay. Maybe the nurse wants to conduct an assessment to learn about the community needs, strengths, weaknesses, locate confirmation data to address any recognized community problems, focus on setting priorities to address health issues in the community. So those are a couple of reasons that community assessments are done. We talked about a windshield survey. We talked about boundaries being the first is a priority. Establish boundaries when doing your community assessment. So as we're going through the nursing process, we've done our assessment. Now we have to kind of diagnose what's going on in the community, right? At this point, we're identifying problems. We are trying to figure out where the problems are coming from. Where are the stressors in the community? What are the challenges in the community? One of the things we have to be mindful about when doing community assessments is our own personal safety. What kinds of things do we need to be mindful of when we're out in the community with regards to our personal safety? Think about it. You're out in the community. You're new to the area.
Your surroundings.
Definitely your surroundings. What about
areas of violence?
Mhm. Public transportation? Is it safe? Maybe leaving a schedule back at your agency of where you're going to be.
It's 2023, so you could drop a pin location on your iPhone.
Okay. Not bringing valuables. What about once you're in the home? Let's say you're in the home doing visits. What are important things to be aware of when you're doing your home visits?
Asking them if they have a weapon.
Mm-hmm. Making sure you have an exit strategy if you need to get out.
Knowing who's in the household, how many people are in the household.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Along with whether or not they have a weapon, if they can show you where it's locked up so that you can see that it's put away safely and out of the reach of kids, and where they keep the keys, how easily accessible is it?
Mm-hmm. Personal safety is a big concern with regards to community practice. You have to be mindful of your own personal safety, whether you're out in the community or whether you're in the home. Okay, let's talk about health education in the community. Okay, I'm in chapter 14. Okay, which starts on page 250. Okay. There are 3 domains to learning. We're talking about health education now. There are 3 domains to learning: cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. Have you guys heard about these yet? Or read about these yet? Remember, we have to understand, we're now doing teaching in the community. So how do we plan for effective teaching? Okay, well, there's 3 domains to learning. The cognitive domain is your thinking. It's the there's 3. There's cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. Okay. One way to think about the nature of learning is to think about these 3. Each domain represents a specific behavioral component. Okay, each level builds on the previous one, but you have to understand the 3 learning domains to provide effective health education. Okay, so cognitive. Cognitive includes memory, recognition, understanding, reasoning, problem solving. kind of the thinking domain of teaching. Okay, affective is your feeling, changes in attitudes, development of values. Okay, and then psychomotor is the doing. Okay, now on page 252. Okay, with psychomotor, it depends on learners meeting 3 conditions. And I'm going to have you go back. I want you to go back and read that because you need to know what the 3 conditions are for the next exam. Okay, so for you're going to get questions about a scenario. Is this affective? Is this cognitive? Is this psychomotor? Which domain, given a scenario, which domain does this come from? If it's a psychomotor question, there are 3 conditions that have to be met. Okay, your ability to learn, how to carry out the skill, and how to practice it. So please be aware of that. But you need to know about the 3 different domains of learning. What are some examples of the way we teach? Well, we may do a presentation. We may do a demonstration. Maybe we do a small informal group. Maybe we do a big health fair for the community. And then if your community has a lot of non-English speaking, non-English speaking people, maybe you have to do a presentation in a different language. Maybe if it's a Hispanic population, you do your educational session in Spanish. Provide all the educational materials in Spanish. Okay. When we talk about health education in the communities, let's talk about the different levels of prevention. What would be some primary prevention activities that you would do in the community with regards to health education? Give me some examples of primary. What is primary?
Well, you could do like a health fair, set up a booth to educate them on the prevention.
Mm-hmm. What about Go ahead.
It's public education, and like family programs.
Mm-hmm. Maybe teaching them about immunizations. Teaching them about healthy lifestyles, healthy nutrition. What would be some secondary interventions that we could use in our health education?
Blood pressure screenings, glucose screenings.
Remember, we're trying to identify people at risk. And what would be some tertiary preventions?
Managing the disease or
Okay, so give me a group of clients that you might be working with. Give me a specific example. Let's say you're working with clients that have had a stroke. What would be an example of a tertiary prevention or an intervention?
Physical therapy.
Okay.
Speech.
Fall risk. Okay. On page 256, there's a box that says how to use plain language in health education. I want you to take a look at that. There's 3: organize the audience, choose words carefully, and make information easy to find. So remember, a lot of what you do in community health is education, health education. So this is a pretty important chapter to plan and organize and effectively provide health education. So have a look at that box and see the bullets under organizing your audience, choosing your words carefully, and making information easier to find. I don't know if anybody has read through this yet, but have a look at that, please. What do you think are some learner-related barriers? So for example, you are organizing to teach a group of people.
Us
You
not
have
being
to,
able, oh, sorry.
nope, you have to be able to know your audience. What kinds of things do you assess for?
I was gonna say us like attending to their learning style, because like you can possibly like make pamphlets and pass them out, but you might have somebody that's an auditory learner. So you more so have to explain to them like what it is that your mission is and what's important that you want to do. Or you do have like visual learners where you can't just give them a pamphlet. You more so they have to see like pictures and examples and information.
Excellent.
Their readiness to learn.
Okay. Excellent. What if you're teaching a group that's some are hearing impaired? Or like Devin said, visually impaired? What if you're teaching aphasic patients? How do you work with them? And if you're teaching kids? I mean, when I was in the schools, I could do an educational hand washing session with preschoolers in the morning, and by the end of the day at the high school, talking about suicide prevention. How do you adjust your teaching skills to take into account some barriers? What about literacy? Health literacy, right? Health literacy is health illiteracy is actually huge in education. What kinds of things might cause people to be health illiterate? And I don't say illiterate in a derogatory way. I'm talking about information, being able to understand information, put discharge instructions in place. What happens if people are health illiterate?
They're not able to comprehend what you're teaching them.
And they may not be able to follow the discharge instructions, right? They may have just a very limited vocabulary on what you're teaching them.
I think that that's when you try to see about having like a family member or a home health aide, like you speak to them about the importance or aftercare to make sure that the patient is getting the care that they need.
And also like medical jargon, like making sure that the information is, simple for them to understand.
Right. That's what we just talked about in the last section, is using words that they understand. Maybe they've been diagnosed with something serious and they don't have the health knowledge to be able to understand how serious it is and what the follow-up is. They can't comprehend treatment plans, future appointments. So barriers are a huge challenge for health education. You have to know your audience. And a couple of other points about health illiteracy, of why that may be present. We talked about, well, we haven't talked about it yet, but maybe cultural, language, maybe lack of education. People with a high school education or lower. Maybe some people have learning disabilities and they're not able to comprehend. And think about our elderly who may be in cognitive decline and don't really understand what you're talking about. I want to read this case study to you, and we're going to answer a couple of questions. Okay, so just listen up. Alice is a single mother who works 2 jobs. One is full-time during the day in a call center. This is our case study in chapter 14. Okay, it's on page 260. So Alice works full-time during the day in a call center. And the second is her part-time job in the evenings cleaning office buildings. When she's not at school, her two children, ages 13 and 7, spend most of their time next door with their neighbor, who looks after them while Alice works. In addition to having some concerns making ends meet, Alice was recently diagnosed with hypoclostremia. Before Alice and her husband divorced, family ate most of their meals together, and there were always a variety of healthy foods to eat. Since Alice has been on her own, it's become difficult to ensure a variety of foods, especially fruits and vegetables, due to the limited grocers in her geographic area. The nearest big chain grocery store is 20 miles away. Okay. In addition to the lack of stores, access to stores, they don't really carry a wide variety of healthy options. Alice rarely has time to cook dinner with her children. She microwaves a lot of the food for herself and her kids just before leaving her job. Okay, so now a little bit about the two kids. Eric and Jackson will often eat unhealthy snacks and candy throughout the day. The neighbor drinks nothing but soda, and that's why they're drinking when under the neighbor's care. That's what they're drinking. Okay, Eric's body mass is at the 35th percentile, but Jason's is at the 98th percentile. Their activity levels are low. Most of the time is spent in sedentary activities, playing video games and watching television. Okay, so Alice has become concerned that her choices are negatively impacting her health and the health for children. She's become stressed, depressed about this, and she has very few social supports to turn to because she's working both of her jobs and she needs the income. The neighbor's daughter-in-law, a registered nurse, came for a visit and spent some time with Alice. She suggested Alice go and speak to somebody about all of this. Alice has health insurance, but has no time to meet with a counselor or nutritionist. So this is a real life scenario of putting your knowledge into practice. So if you were the nurse, what would be your next course of action to try and help Alice and her children? So that's a question to you. Now we're going to answer a couple of questions about that. What would be your next course of action?
Maybe finding a program for the kids to go to, being that they're sedentary and they're just playing video games.
Ask the kids questions that would promote them to want to do the activities, or find resources based on the kids' likes.
Okay. Maybe see if the school has any after-school activities that they could participate in. Okay, what else could the nurse do?
Help her find ways to get food.
What about
As well
talking
as,
to the... Go ahead.
I was gonna say, as well as educate her on hypercholesteremia if she doesn't know what it means. She's been diagnosed with it, but she may not know what it fully entails. So education.
What about talking to the neighbor who cares for the kids and talking about healthy nutrition for her kids? Maybe providing prepackaged snacks for them to have when they're
creating
under her
like a
care.
Community-based program anyway, where everyone could participate, including the whole family, where it's snacks for the entire family and small workouts for the entire family, because if everybody's doing it in the house, it's easier for it to benefit everyone.
Maybe suggest local food banks, local places where she might be able to get healthier food to keep both at her house and provide to the neighbor while if the kids are going to stay there. What about the BMI index of the Jason, 98th percentile? What could we do with mom if she's not aware that this is dangerous? Could we start to educate her on the dangers of obesity? Describe some components of food literacy, how they relate to the family situation. So we just talked about general health literacy, but let's talk about food literacy. What kinds of things do we have to educate mom on? The importance of a healthy diet.
The
What
side
else?
effect- the children are so small, so the side effects long term of what could happen if these children continue to be on this diet.
Mhm. Yep. What else could you do to help mom with these kids? What else could you do to help the neighbor as she's caring for these kids? I mean, you're the community nurse, you're working with this family now. What do you do?
Arrange checkups, whether it's in office or since there's a community nurse at home, checkups every so often.
What about a checkup with a pediatrician?
Yeah,
Does mom
pediatrician.
understand her new diagnosis and how that impacts the functioning of the family? If mom is able to get food from community resources, does she need to work her second job? She's working her second job to get groceries and she can seek out some help in the community. Maybe she doesn't have to work that second job. So as a community nurse, you're thinking ADPI. What's the problem? What kind of interventions can we try and put in place? How do we evaluate that those are working? Okay, so that's a real life situation. You're in the community and you're asked to work with this family.
I think we also need to make sure that we're being mindful to not be accusatory and in the language that you're using with mom as well, because if
Right.
she's going through all these things and having to work multiple jobs just to, put food on the table for her family, she's obviously doing everything that she can. And I think with the language and the way that we're bringing things to her attention during our education, it needs to be kind and
Absolutely.
not accusatory.
Unbiased.
Well, the next section I was going to talk about it's box 14.6 on page 267. And it's the core competencies for communication skills. Please have a look at that. Part of your reading. Communication skills and attitudes. Gives you several examples of core competencies for effective communication. And it talks about attitudes. Listening in an unbiased manner, respecting others' points of view. What do we do about conflict? Conflict is a natural part of human nature. Okay, what do we do if we're in conflict with a client we're working with?
Try to understand their side of the
Exactly.
argument, bring in other people if you need to, if you feel like you're at an impasse or that you're unable to communicate, using the kind of language of, I hear you saying, what I'm hearing is, trying to rephrase what they're saying to you so that everyone's really on the same page and understanding where everybody's coming from.
Mm-hmm. And maybe taking a step back and evaluating our own beliefs, right? And our knowledge and our values, right? Conflict is going to exist. I mean, I have conflict. We all have conflict all the time, whether it's with our kids, our spouses, our students, maybe. I mean, we have conflict all the time. It's a matter of taking a step back and trying to figure out why the conflict is happening. understanding why the conflict is happening. You know, our clients maybe have mental health issues, anxiety, fear. So we need to be very mindful that conflict is going to exist. It's how we deal with it and try to problem solve through it that's going to make the difference. You know, if you're going to be argumentative and not be able to open up and listen to other people's points of view, then you're probably going to be in conflict quite a bit of the time. Right?
I guess that goes back to your points for attitudes, promotes the expression of diverse opinions and perspectives.
Right. Right. I mean, as nurses, we're going to have conflict, some kind of conflict on probably every shift we work. Right? Whether it's a family member, a peer, physician, the patient, the client. It's all about how you approach it. Are you able to listen to others without being judgmental or unbiased? Some people aren't. I mean, does anybody work with anybody who's always in conflict? Seems like they're always in conflict. Yes, no?
Yeah.
Okay, just think of that person for a second. What are they lacking? Why are they always in conflict? What are they lacking? Do you have a family member that's always in conflict? A kid who's always in conflict? A coworker? What are they? Go ahead. What do you think these people they're lacking? That it's always conflict, and how can we help them?
Sometimes it's education or being able to see things from another's point of view, especially if it's like a family member, they think that they know what's right more so than the family member who's actually sick or the staff that's taking care of that family member, or just empathy, or which can be a big problem.
I mean, when you're working with clients in the hospital, long-term care, home, there's a good chance there's going to be some kind of conflict, whether it be with the client itself, family members, yourself internally. So we need to be mindful of conflict. Okay. Okay, I'm going to skip to chapter 11, which is infectious disease prevention and control. So we've covered health education in the community and how to do a community assessment. But remember, you're responsible for reading that as well. Okay, so let's talk about infectious disease prevention and control. Okay, don't forget to read these objectives at the beginning of each of these chapters, because that's what I'm pulling out of each chapter, the objectives. Okay. We don't need to go through historical perspectives, but I'd like for you to read the Healthy People 2030 box in chapter 11. It's on page 196. Okay, there's 3 objectives related to infectious disease and foodborne illness. It's specifically, this one talks about foodborne illness. So please have a look at those. Okay. We've talked before about transmission of communicable diseases. We've talked about the agent, the host, and the environment, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the agent?
Whatever's causing the disease, the bacteria,
Correct.
the virus.
Bacteria, fungi, parasites, viruses. Right? That's the agent. Okay. You have to have a host for an agent to infect. So the host is us. Okay? We're going to be infected with the whatever the agent is. And how we are affected by the agent depends on a lot of things. Depends on our immunity, depends on our maybe age, maybe gender, maybe ethnicity, the severity of the agent. Let's think about COVID. Let's think about COVID for a minute. With regards to the agent is COVID. And let's say the host is who COVID is infecting. What did we find out about nursing homes in, in the elderly during COVID?
They were more susceptible to infection.
Absolutely. We found out that long-term care facilities in the elderly were much more susceptible to get sick, right? And the nursing home, I say nursing home because that would be an environmental factor. Okay, so you have the agent, the host, the environment. So if we're thinking COVID, the agent is the COVID, the host is whomever it's infecting, and the environment is where are they? So for example, maybe a high school phys ed class versus a long-term care facility in the exposure to COVID. The environment makes a difference. Okay, so we learn that being in close with regards to the environment, being in close contact with people, close living quarters. That was a breeding ground for COVID, right? We learned that as far as the host, what if you were already immunocompromised? You were probably more likely to get sick. If you were older, you were probably more likely to get sick. If you were younger, you might have been less likely to get sick. Does that make sense? So you get your agent, your host, and an environment. You have to have an agent to infect a host. And depending on what's going on, environmental factors will determine how sick you get. Okay, does that make sense? That's a real simple explanation, but that's what that's called the epidemiological triangle. You have to have all three. All three are interrelated. What's surveillance? What is surveillance of communicable diseases? What do you think surveillance means?
Monitoring.
Gathering information, right? Surveillance, we're trying to gather information about who is infected, when were they infected, where were they infected. Go back and think about your discussion question you just recently did about the outbreak. Who, when, where, and what. Okay, you gather information about all that. And then when you gather information, who is infected, when were they infected, where were they infected, what were they infected with, then you can start to answer the question of why it happened. Okay. So with regards to infectious diseases, there's a whole section in the book, or it's not a big section, but it's a good section to review. It's on page 201. It's primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. Okay, so with regards to surveillance, the primary goal is to reduce any kind of incidence of a disease by preventing it before it happens. Does that make sense? Tertiary, with regards to surveillance, is preventing the spread of the disease once it occurs. Right? So early identification, early intervention. And then nurses who work in the clinics or schools or wherever, home health, we then provide tertiary intervention to reduce complications and disabilities through treatment and rehab of something they may already have. And so let's say there's an outbreak of pertussis in the schools. It's already there. That now I have to figure out how to communicate to families, how to make sure these kids are not back in school. Those are all tertiary interventions once something has already happened. Okay. There's a couple of bioterrorism agents that I want you to review. You'll be asked about these on the exam. And the two I want you to review are anthrax and smallpox. What do we know about smallpox? Do we have a regular vaccine for smallpox anymore? Are you guys vaccinated against smallpox?
No.
No. However, if you're exposed to smallpox, you can then get a vaccine. Okay, but we do not preventatively immunize against smallpox. Okay, it's been considered eradicated since 79. Okay, we are susceptible to it because we're not vaccinated, but if we are exposed, we can get the smallpox vaccination. Okay, anthrax. What do we know about anthrax? It's typically uncommon for people in the United States to be infected. It's mostly found in agricultural areas, say Central and South America, Sub-Saharan Africa. So I want you to know about those two. Okay. What do we know about vaccines? We know that vaccines are one of the most effective methods of preventing and controlling communicable diseases, right? And that's what we do with educating parents. What are you going to do if you're the school nurse and you have a 10% rate of non-vaccinated kids? The parents have filled out exemptions, whether they're personal exemptions, medical exemptions, religious exemptions. What do you do? Is that okay?
Yes.
Educate as much as possible to all the parents about potential risks and keeping immunocompromised and sick kids home to prevent, spread of communicable diseases and infections, and just do your best.
Exactly. So can you force parents to get their kids vaccinated?
No.
No.
Absolutely not. Can you be judgmental of them if they have not vaccinated their kids?
Actually,
No.
The only thing you can do is try and continue to educate them, okay, on of how effective vaccines are. If they don't get their kids vaccinated, that is their choice. However, with regards, and I can speak for the school settings, if you do have kids that are not vaccinated, you have to have some kind of a plan in place to communicate with these parents if something were to happen. Right? Let's say there was an outbreak of pertussis or an outbreak of chickenpox, and you have 10% of the kids in the school who are not vaccinated. What do you do? You got to make sure you communicate to the parents what's going on so they can have the choice of whether they want to keep their kids home or not. Right? But the most important thing we can do is education. And then the rest of this chapter goes through routine childhood immunization schedule. It goes through measles, rubella, pertussis, goes through all of that. We can skip through that. What about foodborne and waterborne illnesses? Give me some examples. Because these are also very damaging communicable diseases, infectious and communicable diseases. How do we know our food supply and water supply is safe? it's estimated that approximately 1 in 6 people will get some kind of foodborne illness each year. What causes foodborne illnesses? E. coli, what else? Salmonella, right? It's estimated that over 100,000 people are annually hospitalized due to foodborne illnesses. I'd like for you to review box 11.3 on page 207. It's keys to keeping food safe. Talks about cleanliness, separating raw from cooked food, cooking thoroughly. I know these all seem like common sense, but there's a few things on here you might not recognize. And you're going to get asked about food safety on your next exam. Okay, keeping food at safe temperatures. And then use safe water and raw materials. So please have a look at that. And then it goes through and describes each of those kind of foodborne illnesses. What's Lyme disease? Can you catch it from each other? What do you guys know about Lyme?
Actually, you can.
Tick bites.
It's they've actually found that because it's a spiral shaped bacteria, they're doing studies where in amongst sexual partners that one patient with Lyme disease is spreading it to their sexual partner who does not have Lyme disease.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. What is Lyme disease?
I'm a New Englander. I have to
Yeah,
know this stuff.
Interesting. What is Lyme disease?
A tick bite? Caused by a tick bite?
It's a tick bites where you get it. Like
Pardon me?
a tick bites.
Okay. So please read about Lyme disease. There's a little section in your book. I need you to be aware of what Lyme is. Okay, let's jump to chapter 12, communicable infectious disease risks. This is a big chapter. Okay, this is an important chapter that's covered pretty extensively. Okay. The beginning of the chapter goes through HIV. What's the natural history of HIV? What's the plan for education at each stage? How you care for the clients? Okay. The most important thing I want you to understand about HIV is how it's transmitted. Okay. Your healthy people box is at the beginning of the chapter, and it is related to, it has 3 goals related to HIV. Okay. The biggest one is reduce the rate of mother to child HIV transmission. Okay. So there's half of this chapter is about HIV. But again, there's a few things I really want you to focus in on. We don't need to know about the natural history. But I do want you to know about the modes of transition, and that is box 12.1 on page 219. There's 4 ways that HIV can be transmitted. Sexual contact involving exchange of body fluids with an infected person. Sharing or reusing needles, syringes, or other equipment that are being used to prepare injectable drugs. Perinatal transmission from an infected mother to her fetus during pregnancy or delivery to an infant when breastfeeding. This is all outlined for you, page 219. The last mode of transmission is transfusions or other exposure to HIV contaminated blood products, organs, or semen. So that's one of the big takeaways when you read about HIV that I want you to know is the modes of transmission. Okay. And then we go into the next topic is sexually transmitted diseases. We know that sexually transmitted diseases can be either viral or bacterial. Okay. Some examples of bacterial STDs, gonorrhea, syphilis, chlamydia. So those are bacterial. So these can be treated with antibiotics. Okay. But what about STDs that are viruses? Can they be cured
No.
or treated? No, they can't. They end up being chronic diseases leading to a lifetime of just symptom management and infection control. One of the bacterial STDs that could be passed from mom to the baby that's important to know about is syphilis. So if you're working with a pregnant client and they want to know, why do you have to screen me for STDs? What's your answer?
To protect the fetus
To pr-
in throughout the term and during delivery as well.
Right. And let's say they have syphilis. Well, syphilis is bacterial, so it can be treated. You know, if you have a mom was pregnant who delivered and she had syphilis and was not treated during her pregnancy, and she delivers that baby, there's a lot of potential negative outcomes for that child. And then the table 12.1 goes through all the different sexually transmitted diseases. But what I really want you to understand is that they are bacterial and viral. Yes, bacterial can be treated, viral cannot. Pregnant moms, if they are screened for STDs and have syphilis, they need to be treated. It's bacterial. Okay. And then there's a section on syphilis that I want you to read through on page 224. There's a whole section on TB. What do you think the most important things are to know about TB? How is TB transmitted?
Droplet.
And air.
Airborne,
Airborne.
right? Maybe airborne, somebody who's coughing, talking, coughing, sneezing. Coughing is huge with TB. Okay. Other symptoms of TB, fatigue or weakness, weight loss, lack of appetite, chills, fever, sweating at night. And it's a long incubation period. It's 4 to 12 weeks. Okay, so have a read about the tuberculosis section as well. How do we screen for tuberculosis? What do we do? What's the skin
don't-
test?
It's PPD mantoxin.
And what are we looking for? What's a positive skin reaction? What's that going to show? Or what's that going to look like?
The
areas-
induration of the skin test.
What other measures? What might we use to
X-ray,
other than a PPD test? What else might we do?
X-ray.
Chest X-ray
X-ray. Good.
and blood work like the gold quantiferon gold.
Yep.
Isn't there a 3 sputum test that they have to do?
A what?
The 3-step sputum test?
Sputum test.
Mhm.
No, well, at least for purposes of this chapter, we're talking about the PPD and the chest X-ray. What happens if you're diagnosed with TB? What's the treatment?
Almost up to 6 months of like rifampicin.
How are you going to make sure? How are you going to make sure that people are taking that? Like that they're prescribed to, that have been prescribed to take it.
They usually report to public health.
Exactly. Remember that. It is mandatory for public health nurses to do regular visits for people who have been positively diagnosed with TB to ensure they're taking their medication. That's not optional. Okay. And then in this chapter, I want you to look at levels of prevention, primary, secondary, and tertiary. Okay, it's an excellent, excellent box. It talks about different interventions related to infectious diseases. So please have a look at that. It's on page 230. And then we talk about people that have been diagnosed with STDs or HIV. Nurses who are uncomfortable discussing topics such as sexual behavior or orientation are much more likely to avoid being able to assess the risk behaviors of the client, right? If we're not comfortable talking about sexual orientation, sexual behavior, then we're not going to do a great job of identifying risky behaviors, right? We have to understand, again, we have to understand our own values, our own beliefs about sexuality, and realize that, yes, these may be uncomfortable conversations, but we're trying to help the client improve his or her health. Okay? Okay. Got a couple more chapters to cover here. I want to cover the economics. This is chapter 5. What do you guys think? What's the economics of healthcare? What do we think about when we talk about the cost economics of U.S. healthcare? What are some concerns? What causes our healthcare spending? What role does the government play in the economics of healthcare? We in the US spend the most money in the world for any country on healthcare. But we don't have the best outcomes, even though we spend the most money. So what kinds of factors do you think influence spending? What are our demographics? What kinds of populations require lots of healthcare right now? I think they give two main demographics. What are they? This is from,
Geriatric and pediatric.
well, one's right. The elderly, right? Because they're living longer due to medication, treatment, technology. And the other group that is really causing most of our economic healthcare dollars to go to is chronic illness. Okay. We know that, again, poverty leads to poor health outcomes. So the increase in poverty, the increase in homelessness, the increase of job loss, higher unemployment, all lead to potential increases of cost in our healthcare system. What do we know about the homeless population? We just talked about them. Where do they get their healthcare?
Emergency room.
Which is the most expensive places. Think about our rural population. Are they focused on prevention? We talked about them earlier in the term. They're not focused on prevention. So therefore, when do we see them?
Crisis
When
situation.
when they're in advanced stages of their condition, whether it's hypertension, diabetes, whatever, cancer, whatever. Okay. Here's another factor that affects our cost is the uninsured or the underinsured. Where does they seek out their care? If they seek out care. Urgent cares and emergency rooms. So the uninsured or underinsured are very expensive to our healthcare system. We talked about poor Americans in poverty. Access is an issue. Okay, we have public and private healthcare. Public is your Medicaid, your Medicare. Private is your employer's private health insurance. Okay. Levels of prevention with regards to economic prevention strategies. That's on page 82. Okay, what's a primary? A primary prevention strategy could be working with our legislators and insurance companies to support the Affordable Care Act coverage for health promotion services to reduce the risk of disease. That's a great primary prevention. Maybe secondary, encourage clients who are pregnant to participate in WIC. That's a great secondary prevention or intervention. They're pregnant, right? Getting them involved with WIC for a resource potentially increases the number of healthy babies and reduce the costs related to preterm or pregnancy complications. And a tertiary with regards to economic strategies is participate in home visits for moms who are maybe at increased risk for neglecting or abusing their babies. Okay. Then it goes through the whole context of the U.S. healthcare system. It goes through the history, which we don't need to really worry about. What I want you to know is what are the factors that are influencing our healthcare? We started to already talk about them, the demographics. Listen to this comparison. In 1950, more than 50% of US population was younger than 30. That's in 1950. In 2020, that population, 30 years or younger, is now 17% of the population. So we've gone from 50 to 17, below 30. What does that tell you? It's estimated that by 2060, the older than 65 are estimated to be 25% of the population. 25% of the population. Okay, technology and intensity has certainly increased the cost for healthcare. New innovative technology. Financing of healthcare, again, we have public, we have private. There's not a lot from this chapter coming up from the exam, so I wanted to spend the last part of my time on chapter 27, which is violence and human abuse. Okay, so that's the last chapter we're going to cover here. Doesn't matter where you work in your profession. It doesn't matter where you work. You are always going to be working with either maybe victims, mostly victims, but perpetrators of violence and abuse. Okay? What do you think? What's the scope? I see violence increasing across our country. Do you? Why do we think that is? What are some
Uh,
factors that increase that?
I mean, not looking at the chapter or anything, I don't know if violence is increasing or if it's because we have more access to cameras, social media, the news.
Good point. What others? Why do we think violence is increasing? I'll throw something out there, the increase of mental health problems leading to violence. There's a
Or
lot of people,
untreated mental health problems
pardon me,
that are untreated mental health
untreated,
problems.
right, untreated.
They don't have a way to know. And how do you know if you don't know?
Mhm. Mhm.
Drug
I think
addiction.
also the financial aspect as well. People are in tough spots right now, and coping mechanisms kind of go out the window, and people reach their boiling point, their breaking point, and
There's a lot of people struggling right now.
Also the stigma, like Hispanics don't seek help, for example, when it comes to mental health. It's such a like, oh my God, we don't look for help. That's not a thing. Like, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But we're going to be working with victims and perpetrators of violence throughout our nursing career. So things you need to be familiar with, and this probably is not just in the community setting, but in whatever setting you're in. Okay. The first part of the chapter talks about the social and the community factors affecting violence. Okay. It talks about biological and personal history factors that may increase the likelihood of a person becoming a victim or a perpetrator. Maybe other societal factors, education, substance abuse, a history of abuse, including witnessing abuse, mental health disorders. Relationships play a big part in violence, right? Social relationships with your peers, your intimate partners, your family members. Okay, an example, the risk of violence is increased in a woman and one or more children living with an abuser. We know that adolescents are more likely to engage in violent behavior with their peers. And we know that the levels of violence in the community, such as schools, workplaces, neighborhoods, has increased. So what can we do? Well, a few things we can do is we can look at coordinating resources and support services, reaching out to our community agencies, whether it's mental health services or religious affiliations or law enforcement. Right? How do we evaluate the access to mental health services, substance abuse treatment centers? A lot of communities don't have those. Okay, and we have different kinds of violence that are addressed in this chapter. We have homicide, which we all know what that is, assault, sexual violence and rape, human trafficking, and then suicide. So everything except suicide is obviously violence against another. Suicide is violence, considered violence against yourself. Suicide is a huge, large, and growing public health problem. Family violence. This chapter talks about family violence and abuse. Family violence, sexual, emotional, physical, financial, can cause significant injury and death. Okay, it's usually the most, in a family violence, it's generally most powerful against the least powerful. Then you have your intimate partner violence, sexual, physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse caused by a current partner. A couple of different types of family violence, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, trafficking, child abuse. Box 27.1 on page 491 is a good box to review, or I encourage you to review it. It's determining risk factors for child abuse. Because as we all know, we're mandated reporters, right? We see something, we have to say something. And it's not just in our home environment or a work environment. It could be at the grocery store, could be at the local park, the rec center. We are mandated reporters. Right? So it's really important, just as a citizen, to understand what the risk factors are for child abuse. There's also a really good information on page 492 is how do you identify potentially abusive parents? If you're working with kids, like I was in the schools, I had to be spot on with this. How to identify potentially abusive parents? What are they talking about? What behavior are they demonstrating? How are they acting towards the child in your company? Are they providing contradictory histories? Does the kid come in and say something in the morning to the nurse? They call the parent and there's a different story. So look at the information on how to identify potentially abusive parents. Okay. Nursing interventions, right? I want you to read through this section. It's on page 497. Nursing interventions for violence and abuse, right? And I'm just about done here. Primary prevention begins with a community approach. And this is where your partnerships come in. Criminal justice, education, social service, people from community advocacy, public health. Everybody comes together to try and strategize how we're going to minimize or prevent violence. And there's a good example on page 497. There's 6 bullets of what communities have tried to reduce the violence. Family programs that teach parents how to more effectively take care of their kids, respond to their kids. Maybe preschool programs that help children develop intellectual and social skills. Home visiting programs for at-risk families to help be able to maybe identify early signs of child abuse and neglect. Okay, so lots and lots going on in our communities, and we're right in the middle of it if we're out there working as community nurses. Okay. That's a lot to cover. We cover a lot today, but you got to do your own part too and read your, do your reading. But again, focus on the objectives in the chapter. I've tried to pull out the information that supports the objectives. You don't have to read every chapter from front to back. It's not necessary. Be able to articulate the objectives in the chapter, and that's what I've tried to kind of narrow down for you. What are you thinking? Some of those are hard topics. Violence and human abuse and trafficking, and it's tough. But it doesn't matter where you're working in your nursing profession, you're always going to be exposed to these clients. Right? A lot to think about. So a lot of information today. There'll be a lot of information next week too. How do you feeling about today? You learn a lot?
Yeah, we covered a lot.
Yeah, we did cover a lot. But remember that umbrella of community nursing. When you first started this class in week 1, you probably had no clue or very little clue of how involved a community nurse is and all the different things that he or she can be involved with. But these are issues that go on in your own communities and your own zip codes every day. right? In the schools, in the daycare centers, in the assisted living facilities. All these issues are going on. All right. So we covered a lot today. I'll stay on for any questions. I'm done. You know how to reach me. I'm going to send out my schedule later on today for you to sign up for exam 2 review or test taking or whatever you want to go through. We can go through whatever. So hopefully today was helpful. We'll get you the exam 3 study guide. So we've covered 2 of 3 weeks. And then next week there's a lot. So really, as you're preparing for class next week, be mindful. There's 8 chapters. You don't have to read 8 chapters. Just have a peek at the objectives at the beginning of each chapter, and then search for that information so that you could articulate the objective. Okay, I can't stress that enough. Don't feel like you need to read.
PowerPoints have been helpful.
Yeah, PowerPoints are great.
Mhm.
Yep. PowerPoints are great. Okay, well, good to see everybody. Have a good rest of the week. And then let's see. We'll see you guys next week. But reach out if you need anything in the meantime, okay?
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.